Hey everyone. So I figured we could go over some factoring because what we're going to be doing next, what you're going to do tomorrow in school, is do graphing from factored form. So you're going to need a review of factoring. So I'm just going to do half of these examples, and then your assignment is going to be to do the other half. So I'm going to do just like one or two from each section. So the first section is factoring out a GCF. This is something that you want to always start with this, no matter what kind you have. Always start with looking for a GCF every single time. So when you have to factor, first see if there's a GCF. A GCF, remember, stands for greatest common factor. And it's basically, you look at the terms and see if they have any numbers in common, like anything that goes into all of them evenly, or any variables in common, like say they all have at least one x or they all have at least two x, something like that. If your first term is negative, you always want to take out a negative GCF. That's something else to note. So if we take a look at this first one, notice that, let's look at the numbers first. Notice that, we have 2, we have 5, we have negative 24. Those are not all divisible by the same number. So that means they don't have a numeric GCF. There's no number that they have in common. Now let's take a look at the variables. See how there's x to the fourth, x to the third, x squared. See how they all have at least two x's? That means the GCF is x squared. That's the GCF. So what you do with the GCF is you take it out, I wrote it all in these directions too, is you take it out a set of parentheses, and then you think about, what do I multiply x squared by to get to 2x to the fourth? So I need a 2. I already have 2 x's on the outside, and I need to get to 4, so I need 2 more x's. So as a way to check it, if we multiply these, x squared times 2x squared is going to be 2x to the fourth. Okay, let me erase some of this so it doesn't get too crazy. Okay, next we want to know, what do I multiply x squared by to get 5x to the third? Well, I know I need a 5, and then I have 2 x's on the outside. I need to get to 3, so I need 1 more x. And then lastly, the last term, I need a negative 24. And I already have x squared here and here. So that means I don't want to put any more x's next to the 24. That's it, I'm done. Now, typically, you're going to want to take a look on the inside and determine if what's left over inside the parentheses needs to be factored. This particular case, I just made this example up, so we're done now. This is as far as we can go. So that's that one. I'm going to start number 2 for you, and you guys are going to finish it as part of your assignment today. So notice that this one has a negative in the front. Anytime you have a negative in the front, your GCF needs to be negative. And so I'll help you with the GCF too. See how this has 5 x's, this has 4, this has 3. They don't have any numbers in common in the front, but they do have 3 x's in common. So the GCF is going to be x to the third, but you need to take out a negative. That's really important. Anytime your first term, your leading coefficient is negative, you take out a negative. So what's that going to do on the inside is it's going to just change the signs. The first term is going to be positive, the second term is now going to be negative, and the last term is now going to be negative. So you just have to take that into consideration. So try that. We'll go over that next time. Okay, the next section is trinomials when a is equal to 1. This is, well, first you, of course, want to look for a GCF, but when you have trinomials where a is 1, you want to think about numbers that multiply to the last term and add to the middle term. So multiply to negative 10, but add to 3. When you find your two numbers, you go to 2 sets of parentheses. You have x here, x here. The two numbers here are going to be positive 5 and negative 2, because positive 5 times negative 2 is negative 10. Positive 5 plus negative 2 is positive 3. So then that would be your answer. Now, what we're going to do with this with graphing is then we're going to take this and graph it, graph the polynomial. Okay, we're also going to do number 4 together. So remember, we have to always look for a GCF, and kind of like a tip is this first term does not just have 1 in the front. So this is trinomials where a is 1. See how this one just had a 1 in the front? This has a negative 3 in the front. So that tells me there's probably a GCF. So you want to look at each term. Notice that each of these 3 terms is divisible by 3. They don't have any x's in common, though, just a 3. But notice that the first term is negative. So I'm going to take out a negative 3. What happens when I take a negative 3 out of negative 3x squared is I have just an x squared, a positive x squared left over in the parentheses, because negative 3 times x squared is negative 3x squared. Okay, next, I'm taking the negative 3 out of the negative 6x squared. So what do I need to multiply this by to get this? And it's going to be positive 2x. So negative 3 times positive 2x would give us negative 6x. And then negative 3 times what would give me positive 45? It's going to be negative 15. Okay, so we have this. Notice that now inside the parentheses, we have something that looks like this first example. It's a trinomial where a is 1. So now I want to ask myself, what are two numbers that multiply to negative 15 and add to positive 2? So that negative 3 stays out in the front. Remember, you put x and x. So some factors of 15, we have 1 and 15, and then 5 and 3. So it's going to be positive 5 and negative 3 because we want it to add to positive 2. So we want to take the sign of the bigger number. So then that would be it. That's number 4. I'm going to have you guys do 5 and 6. Remember, you want to think of numbers that multiply to the last term. So we want multiply to 3. We want to add to positive 1, and then you go to your 2 binomials. Okay. The next part is grouping. So we learned grouping when we learned factoring when a is bigger than 1, like these, part D. We rewrote it into 4 terms. So we're going to encounter some problems, some polynomials that start off as 4 terms. If you have anytime you have 4 terms, the only way to do it is with grouping. And so this is what you do for grouping. You put parentheses around the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. Then you look at each set of parentheses independently. So I'm going to start with this first one. You take out the GCF. So we want to think of what number does 6 and 8 have in common? 2. And then x to the third and x squared, they have an x squared in common. They both have at least 2 x's. Then you do your parentheses. 2x squared times what would give us 6x to the third? It's going to be 3x. 2x squared times what would give us 8x squared? It's going to be 4. Now we do the same thing over here. Remember, once you take the GCF out and write inside the parentheses, it should match this. So notice this is a negative leading coefficient here, so we need to take out a negative GCF. So negative 15x and negative 20, they have a 5 in common, but I need to take out a negative. So it's going to be a negative 5. Negative 5 times what gives me negative 15x? It's going to be positive 3x. Negative 5 times what gives me negative 20? It's going to be positive 4. So see how these match? That's what you want. You want those to match. Okay, so now we're going to write our answer. So the one that's repeated, we'll write. And then the 2x squared and the negative 5, those GCFs, that becomes the other part of our answer, like that. And so that's it. So you guys are going to try number 8. You're going to group the first 2, group the last 2, take out the GCF, write your answer. We just have 2 examples left. So this is trinomials where a is greater than 1 and there's no GCF. So see, it says first take out a GCF if there is one. If you look at example 9, there is no GCF here, nothing that goes into all 3 of those. So that's how you know you have to do box method or grouping. Now, some of you did box method back when we learned this at the beginning of the year. Some of you did grouping. Now remember, the first step for both of them is to multiply the first and the last numbers. 2 and 2 is 4. 2 times 2. Then you want to think of numbers that multiply to 4 but add to negative 5. So, I mean, our only factors here really are 1 and 4. Those are our only options. If we make both of those negative, they would multiply to positive 4 and add to negative 5. Once you figure out your numbers, if you're going to do the grouping way, you're going to rewrite. So this is the grouping method. So it's similar to what we just did, but we first have to rewrite it in those 4 terms. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the original and we're going to replace negative 5x with negative 1x and negative 4x. We're going to have 2x squared minus 1x minus 4x. Some of you maybe didn't choose this way and did box method. I'll show you in using that as well. These problems don't come up that often, to be honest, but I figured I'd still go over it. So now I need to take out the GCF of this binomial. 2x squared and negative 1x just have an x in common. So I'm going to have 2x minus 1. And then negative 4x and 2 have a 2 in common, but the first term's negative, so I need to take out a negative 2. So then you're going to have 2x minus 1. Notice that these are repeated, so then your final answer is just going to be the repeated one, 2x minus 1, and then the two GCFs, x minus 2. And that's your answer. I'm going to show you doing the same problem, but with box method, and then you're going to try number 10. So with box method, these first steps are still the same. You multiply the first and the last, figure out what multiplies to 4 and adds to negative 5, which we did right here. Then you make a box, a 2 by 2 box, maybe a straight one. Okay. Oh boy. Okay. Trying too hard to make it straight and neat. Okay, so now we have a 2 by 2 box. The first term goes in the top left. The last term goes in the bottom right. And then the negative 1 and the negative 4, we put x's next to them, and it's negative 1x, negative 4x. Now what we do is we identify the GCF of each column and each row, and you write them where I put those dots. So let's start with this column here. The GCF of 2x squared and negative 1x is just going to be x. And whatever sign these three boxes are, that's what sign you put above or on the left. So for these two, negative 4x and 2, negative 4x and 2 have a 2 in common. And since this is negative, we're going to put negative 2. Now we're going to do these two. They have a 2 and an x in common. And since this one's positive, that's going to be positive. And then negative 1x and 2, those have a 1 in common. And then since this is negative, this has to be negative. So see how 2x minus 1 is the same as this? And then x minus 2 is the same as that. That's what you want. So that's box method. Oops. So I want you guys for your assignment today to just do the ones that I didn't do. So we have nothing down there. Number 10, number 8. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 problems. So that's pretty simple. So try those problems. We'll go over them tomorrow, and then we'll learn how to graph tomorrow from standard form. All right, that's it. Let me know if you have questions, and have a great